June 4th, 1943. Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas, 10 p.m. A pencil trembles in the hands of Unteroffizier Werner Burkhardt. He writes words that could destroy him, words that could get him thrown into solitary confinement. By his own officers, his diary is hidden, his hand shakes. But he has to write this down. He has to. The Americans must be lying to us. He pauses, looks out the window again. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. What did he just see? What could shake a hardened Afrika Korps veteran so badly that his hand trembles as he writes? Through that train window, rolling across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night, Werner witnessed something impossible. Something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Lights everywhere, endless lights, electric lights blazing from every farmhouse, every street corner, every shop window, an endless constellation of electricity, stretching across the Texas plains, as far as his eyes could see, at 10 p.m. at night. You need to understand what this meant. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged the entire Reich into darkness since 1940. Even before the war, barely 20% of German farms had electricity. Rural Germans lived in darkness, cities dimmed their lights. The nation was dark. But here, in what Nazi propaganda had described as decadent, collapsed America, electricity flowed like water, like it meant nothing, like it was infinite. At that moment, 1,850 veterans of Rommel's Afrika Korps stepped down from the train. Not ordinary soldiers. These were the desert fighters who had driven the British back to Egypt. Men who had earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself. The elite. The true believers. And here's what's about to break your mind. They didn't step off cattle cars. They didn't emerge from freight wagons packed like animals. They descended from cushioned Pullman coaches, passenger trains, with dining services, with sleeping berths, with air conditioning that the American sergeant actually apologized for because it wasn't working properly. Air conditioning in August for prisoners of war. These men had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's personal train. The entire population of Mexia had turned out. Small-town Americans. Curious, not hateful. Watching their enemies step off trains that were nicer than most German officers had ever seen. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger something unprecedented. The most profound psychological transformation in modern POW history, not through torture, not through propaganda, through something far more devastating, the sheer, overwhelming, undeniable display of American industrial capacity. The collapse had begun weeks earlier, May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered, along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers, the Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters. Suddenly prisoners, among them, was Hauptmann Friedrich Rathke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the France campaign. Wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would tell the story, the psychological impact of American captivity on the Nazi mind. And it started in the most unexpected way, with food. The journey began in the port of Oran, Algeria. As Rathke and 30,000 other POWs waited for transport ships, American efficiency was already cracking their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily, with organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved, even at the height of its power. Identity cards photographed and filed, medical examinations completed, inoculations administered, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German, by American officers who had been trained specifically for this moment. But then came the first real shock. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, would later write to his mother, "Listen to his words. In the cage at Oran, while we waited for ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare." Pause on that. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda that they were trying to impress us before shipping us off. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration. Think about that. Standard. Normal. Everyday food for American soldiers was better than these elite German troops had eaten in months. The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. 4 days. At Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California. A fact that would have been dismissed as impossible propaganda if the Germans had known it. These vessels were produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production. 3 ocean-going ships per day. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 provided the second phase of psychological demolition. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division kept a detailed account. Listen to his words. "The ship's crew disposed of more food waste each day than my entire company had received in weekly rations during the final months in Afrika." Let me repeat that. More food waste per day than weekly rations. The American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk that had sat too long. They did this openly, without thought, not to mock us, but because to them this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless. Can you imagine? Watching your captors throw away more food and garbage than you'd eaten in weeks, not as cruelty, but as routine. The ships themselves became floating classrooms in American power. The POWs discovered that the vessel carrying them was one of 2,710 Liberty ships that would be built during the war, each one requiring 250,000 parts, assembled from components manufactured in 32 states. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stauberg wrote in his memoirs, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we, and perhaps the British possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. It was then I first suspected that Germany had already lost the war." August the 2nd, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first sight of America shattered everything. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres. Its docks stretched for miles. Its cranes loaded and unloaded dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the Ruhr, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. He wrote in his secret diary, "Each crane lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses in Germany. They moved with electric power, smoothly, continuously, without the coal smoke that choked our industrial cities. The prisoners were formed into columns for the march to the waiting trains. Along the route, they passed parking lots filled with civilian automobiles, hundreds of them, belonging to dock workers. Let that sink in. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and the party elite. The Volkswagen, the people's car promised to Germans since 1934, remained a propaganda dream. Fewer than 1,000 had ever been delivered to civilians. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work in their own cars, but nothing prepared them for the trains themselves, not boxcars, not the 40 and 8 wagons, 40 men or 8 horses. That had carried German troops across Europe. Full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars with panoramic windows. Hauptmann Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." The American guard seemed almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly in our car. Air conditioning, in August. We had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's personal train. The 3-day train journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia that first night, the prisoners pressed their faces against windows, witnessing an America that couldn't exist, according to everything they had been told. Every small town blazed with illumination. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro. Communities that in Germany would have been lucky to have a single electric street lamp. Here they displayed illuminated shop windows, electric signs, houses with lights burning in multiple rooms. The trains passed factories running night shifts, their windows glowing, parking lots full even at midnight. Obergefreiter Meyer, whose father was a Nazi party block leader in Hamburg, wrote, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guards told us this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said we would see." In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. The prisoners watched as American railway workers performed in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. Automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, mechanized lubrication systems. Every aspect of the operation demonstrated technological superiority. More disturbing still was the casual wealth of the workers themselves. They wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and threw the empties into bins without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, calculated something shocking. That single railway yard they stopped in used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day. He wrote, "The waste was magnificent. They left lights burning in empty buildings. Electric fans ran in vacant rooms. It was the carelessness of infinite resource." As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners encountered American industrial power in full display. Through the windows, they watched endless factories, each one larger than anything most had seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, the trains slowed. They passed the Rubbertown complex, synthetic rubber plants that had sprung from empty fields in just 18 months. 4 massive facilities, each employing thousands of workers, producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood the implications immediately. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them, just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country." The trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit. visible from miles away. This single factory, built in just 9 months, produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000 parts, manufactured by 1,500 subcontractors. The plant consumed 2.5 million square feet of floor space and used more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Hauptmann Werner, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window. He counted 17 B-24s in various stages of completion, visible from the train. We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat. But I could see the precision of the assembly lines, the quality of the construction. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. The deeper the trains penetrated into America, the more complete became the destruction of Nazi mythology. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River. Below them, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. The prisoners could see grain elevators stretching along both banks, each one holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, wrote, "The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. I watch them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." In Kansas City, the train stopped at a massive stockyard. Tens of thousands of cattle waited for slaughter. The smell of meat-packing plants filled the air for miles. German POWs who had subsisted on 200 grams of meat per week in Afrika, when lucky, watched American workers eating beef sandwiches during their lunch break. Gefreiter Paul Fischer wrote, "They ate meat like we ate bread." He paused. Crossed that out. No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. The guard bought us hamburgers from a stand near the station. Meat, cheese, vegetables on white bread for 15 cents. He bought 20 of them without thinking, paid with a $1 bill. This was not special. This was their normal food. And this was still just the beginning. They hadn't even reached the camps yet.